as the dogs that didn't bark, like Trump's name repeatedly surfaces. As in 2011, Jeffrey Epstein emailed Ghislaine Maxwell with a cryptic group, like, I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump, means victim. I spent hours at my house with him, and he has never been once mentioned. And the police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. And Maxwell replied, I have been thinking about that, which is translates as Epstein has a stunt that Donald Trump, whom he knew, spent a significant time with a certain underage girl at Epstein's home and hadn't been publicly implicated. And Trump was the dog that didn't bark, and the big name that shockingly hadn't exploded into a scandal. And the named girl in question was almost certainly just a Virginia Giffle, and just who met a Maxwell while working at a Trump Mar-a-Lago, and was then pulled into Epstein's orbit. And Epstein sounded almost baffled that Trump wasn't just facing the music, and the girl spent hours at my house just with him, and yet he has never once been mentioned by authorities. Like, fast forward to 2019, as in a private email to author Michael Wolff, Epstein wrote publicly, Trump knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop, and according to the Epstein, Trump was aware that Maxwell had been recruiting underage girl at Mar-a-Lago and told her to knock it off. And Trump's camp just spins this. Trump just interviewing to ban Epstein from his club, and once he realized what was happening, like, a fact, even just Epstein acknowledged that like Trump said he asked me just to resign, like my membership, and never a member ever, in that same email. And it's a bizarre contradiction. Like, Epstein privately expressed amazement at Trump hadn't been publicly dragged in, implying that Trump had been close contact with at least one victim. And yet Epstein also wrote that Trump never got to message or directly abused anyone. And in other words, Epstein was telling Maxwell Trump is a big dog that hasn't barked. So, like, while telling others that Trump didn't participate, but he knew, and this is a dirty tension: proximity versus participation. And Virginia Griffith herself has consistently created and cleared that Trump of wrongdoing, and she said multiple times that Trump never laid a hand on her and never abused me, and he could have just been branded, and as she wrote in her memoir, and the Trump's team has just brandished those statements as a shield, and framing Epstein's leaks email as a partisan smear, and just pointing out that even Griffith, just the victim in question, exonerates Trump. And they also note that Trump buried Epstein from a Mar-a-Lago around just 2007, and a quote from the White House aide that the President Trump kicked him out just because of Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile and he was a creep. So in Trump's narrative, was the one guy who took a stand against Epstein. Yet Epstein's 2011 emails suggest that otherwise. So it implies that Epstein was amazed that Trump hadn't been just caught up, because the victim spent hours at my house with him. Like, think about that. Why was Epstein 75% there, confident that Trump wouldn't be implicated? Like, possibly because Epstein expected that the girl to talk about authorities, to ask, and it never happened. And it's almost like Epstein was shocked at the Trump's lack or system's negligence. And there were also missing names like a blackout elites Epstein shielded. So, like, when Epstein files were finally released, like flight logs, contact list, court documents, and many expected just a flurry of the high-profile names. And instead, so we got black bars and heavy redactions labeled as a private individual, like non-party, etc. And officially, so there were to protect the privacy of the folks, like not public enough to warrant exposure. But guess what? multiple journalists and insiders have confirmed that some of those blackout names are major power players and the wealthy financials and international businessmen, even politicians, and just who absolutely are just about the public figures and the redacted and those that were just frankly suspicious selective. And it appears that the system decided certain names were too explosive to reveal and is slapping like the private individual that kind of tag on them to cover. And if we are considering like this for a moment, like in a one court document, an entry is blacked out entirely except for an innocuous phrase, and just some investigative reporters later just hinted that behind one black bar just was a person connected to European royal family, and the court justified redacted it by saying disclosure would cause some kind of reputational damage on international scale, and in a plain English, so it was too powerful to expose, which translates of that as just legally. So if we name the person, like a lot of very important people will be very embarrassed and very angry. And since when is embarrassment a grounds to hide or reveal like or those relevant names in a trafficking case? And there were like multiple just glaring examples. Like if we will consider like another example that the Epstein flight logs list passenger names for each trips, and just on several flights, so the passenger name is literally listed as redacted. But then you see that same redacted flew multiple just times, and this isn't just a one of anonymity just for a victim. So it's a repeated filler on Epstein's jet whose identity is being actively concealed. Like, who could warrant that? Like someone who is identified, we would just immediately let them recognize it, but and whose presence on Epstein plane half a dozen times just wouldn't raise a major alarm. But in the contrary, so like less famous folks like pilots and staffs are named. So these repeat redacted entries point to high-profile individuals and just shrouded by design, and it's systematic. And we also learned, just through a legal proceeding, that Epstein's attorneys fought to keep a certain name sealed because exposure would cause annoyance or embarrassment to those people. And that phrase, embarrassment, even appears in a court filing. Like, think about that, not to protect an ongoing investigation, not to ensure safety, but to spare rich people some embarrassment. And it's infuriating. So, like, as one lawyer for victims put it, as they're not hiding names for a safety. They are hiding them because the powerful people can still just to make a phone call and get his things blacked out. And even the FBI saw files like a hidden cover of identities and agency flight notes from the 2005 to 2007 investigation mentioned a specific VIP guests at Epstein's home, but in the final official reports released, those sections are sanitized or names removed. And when the House Oversight Committee like pressed DOJ in 2023 like to release Epstein's related files, and a DOJ so responded that many documents contain names of individuals like not of investigative interest, and implied they would just stay redacted to protect privacy. Like, excuse me, if they were in Epstein's FBI case files, and at one point investigators thought they were of interest, and why not literally declare them off limits now? And the pattern is obvious, like when a power is at stake, the blackout bars came out, and when naming could just rock a government or just Fortune 500 a boardroom, like suddenly it's a private. And meanwhile, like names that hadn't been dragged through the mud, like a Prince Andrew or Alan Dershowitz, were left visible. Like people like those kind of people, and because they are cat out just of a big just bad way, and it's an unknown about face like a names that remain hidden. And one of the most egregious instances that a source leaked that One redacted name in a flight log was an extremely prominent figure, foreign leader, like a current head of state. And Epstein just really had a sitting president or a prime minister on his plane. That's a dynamic information. But apparently, revealing it would just create a diplomatic nightmare, so redacted it stays. Again, too powerful to expose. Like, let's call this what it is, elite protectionism. And it's a system shielding certain higher-ups from public scrutiny solely just because of their status. And this erodes the trust profoundly. And the public isn't stupid, so we can see the selective nature of it and infer just exactly what it means. As one commentator just said that it's institutions that don't redact and nobody's like they redact the people who can make a phone rings, and in Epstein's case those phone rang off the hook. Like even Congress is united for once in its suspecting in full play, and even in July 2025, like a House passed a resolution like calling for a full release of Epstein's client like list and associated documents, and explicitly just a warning DOJ not to withhold names just to spare embarrassment or political sensitivities. And the lawmakers from both parties just basically said like we know you are just hiding VIPs under just those black bars, and we are not okay with it. Like when every other name is exposed and one name suddenly hidden. So you're not looking at the privacy, you're looking at the power. And the patterns don't lie, people do. And the pattern is that Epstein files is that the names like were only redacted to protect the influential, and the message like that if you are rich or connected enough, the system will quietly label you as a private citizen and cover your tracks. It's outrageous. And this selective secrecy is exactly why conspiracy theories thrive, as if the DOJ and the courts were simply transparent, we wouldn't have to speculate. But by hiding the names that they try to bury, like they practically beg us to fill in the blanks, and that you can bet we do. Like in conclusion, those missing names are the dirty secrets remaining in Epstein's case. One journalist who saw and unredactedly said it would be cause seismic just reputational shock if this came out all at once. To which I say like, so be it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the victim deserves the truth, and the public deserves to know so-called elites so were and to win with Epstein and to get away with it. And the black bars are protected to people who likely just need exposure most of all. And until those names came out, just justice and history so will be incomplete. And the JP Morgan, the Chase and Angle, like money over morals, like there were like multiple articles with the same title, like follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. And if you do that, in Stein's case, like it leads to you to straight into just the walls of a JP Morgan Chase and the largest bank of America, like yeah, and reveals a sordid tale of a greed and just willful blindness, and while just the vulnerable girls were being abused. And JP Morgan was abused, just flagging Epstein's accounts internally and suspicious, and then continuing to profit of them for years. Like, let's talk numbers. Compliance staff at the JP Morgan noted that over 1 billion in transactions involving Epstein's, like 70% of which were flagged as potentially illegal. And they saw payments that looked like structuring, like tiny transfers designed to avoid detection rules, and huge wires to Russian and Eastern European recipients, and with female names or model agencies, and a cash withdrawals exceeding almost like 1 million, like a year in the sums, just typical, or for just the paying girls, and even just the payments labeled for things like tuition that seems fishy. And one journal mail from a frustrated compliance officer in 2010 just literally asked, like, See below new allegations of an investigation related to child trafficking. And are we still comfortable with this client, like who is now a registered sex offender? And this was stand to a higher ups about Epstein. Like what did higher ups do? Overall compliance repeatedly. And between 2008 and 2013, like at least 4 times, JP Morgan's risk division has sounded alarms on Epstein, like each time executives just pushed back, and Epstein is a high value client, and Epstein brings a lot of business, and we can manage the risk. And they even established new accounts for Epstein Circle, like after his conviction. And why? Like because Epstein had over 200 million on deposit and and was just plugging the bank into his wealthy friends. And in one email, a top JP Morgan exec quipped that Epstein should be kept because he would refer 40 potential clients over the next few years. And Epstein was an earner for them. And it gets uglier. Like Jess Staley, at the time head of the JP Morgan private bank, was Epstein's close buddy and advocate inside the bank. And the mail showed them exchanging some disturbingly suggesting messaging and just using a Disney princess names as a code for girls. And Staley visited Epstein's townhouse in 2009, while Joseph Epstein was on a work release from a jail, and to talk with business and presumably just ensure that the gravy train is continued. And in 2013, as a public scrutiny of Epstein mounted, JP Morgan finally decided to sever ties, but even then, they didn't report the full extent of Epstein's suspicious activities to the government until 2019, after Epstein's arrest. And they kept those dirty secrets in the house for 6 extra years. And it's a jaw-dropping. A bank found 250 high-risk Epstein transactions, and like payments to a countless young women with an Eastern European surnames, and wires to charities in just the Virgin Islands that just look like bronze, just ball cash, and withdrawals labeled tips, and totaling millions. And still they kept him as a client. Like, why? Because he was handing them a referral to other just ultra wealthy individuals to bank with JP Morgan. And Epstein, in fact, brought JP Morgan silence with the business. And emails revealed in the court shows that compliance officers just practically just begging to cut ties and begging to slap down by a senior exec who said just not yet. And one compliance official vented in 2008 that why is this guy still a client? Like it fell on deaf ears. And at JP Morgan, not only just kept Epstein, they courted him. And in 2011, Mary Erdős, who runs the JP Morgan Asset and Wealth Management, went to Epstein Manhattan home for a meeting. Imagine a top bank executive sitting in a lair just of a convicted pedophile and just presumably to discuss how to maintain their lucrative relationship. And in 2013, weeks after JP Morgan officially terminated Epstein as a client, documents show senior JP Morgan folks were still meeting him. And one exec even just had a lunch with Epstein to pitch a new just investment product. And it's like they just couldn't quit him. Why? Money, cold hard fees. And Epstein accounts brought in substantial revenue. He had dozens of accounts at times and over 400 million across them. And he taped JP Morgan services to wire money to people around the world. And some wires the bank itself later just flagged as a possibly just suspicious. And JP Morgan warned the US government about Epstein's activities and just only belatedly, they filed a flurry of suspicious activity reports in 2018 when Epstein was arrested again, basically a decade after their first saw red flags. And as a Senate report later said, they filed the SARS when it was too late to matter. And in the end, JP Morgan will pay settlements and move on. Like, no executive will likely face the personal consequences, but make no mistake, for over a decade, JP Morgan Chase was Jeffrey Epstein's banker, his facilitator, and his financier, and they did it for the oldest reason in the book, profit. And it's an ugly just stain on the bank and in the cautionary tale about how too big to fail and can sometimes mean too big to care. And if we will just also look at the flight logs with email dumps like rich lies and the paper trails, there was a phrase, I barely knew the guy. Like, how many times have we heard the powerful people say that about Jeffrey Epstein? Like, it's become a slick cliche, and over, and the paper trail proves it's a lie. And it's a contrast sum, just a public statement versus what flight logs and the mail show. For example, Bill Clinton. I had a limited interaction with Epstein, and that was a lie. Only met a few times, never on an island, etc. Just the question was like, really? Like, flight logs show Clinton took at least 26 flights to Epstein's private jet between 2001 and 2003, and often just with Epstein himself on board. Like, destination included Asia and Africa, and Clinton's own aide, Doug Band, coordinated many of these trips with Epstein's team, and emails from Epstein's circle discussed helping arrange Clinton's travel and even just providing girls. And one witness recalls that Epstein just boastfully saying that Bill Clinton owes me favors, and it wasn't one meeting. So it was a pattern of extensive contract. And the Clinton spokesman later just admitted that Clinton visited Epstein's private island in 2003, and Zoll claims it was innocent. And regardless, the Clinton's claim of a few counters is demolished by the logs. As I put it on the camera, like, limited interaction becomes a private shuttle service when you read the logs. And Clinton's name appears dozens of times. And he even wrote a friendly thank you letter to Epstein in 2011, like after Epstein's conviction, uncovering in the recent document dump. So much for distancing. And Bill Clinton is exposed by frequency. Like, he was there often. Another prominent figure was Prince Andrew. Like, he was more of an acquaintance. I saw him rarely, and after 2010, not at all. Like that was the phrase, and that was Andrew's story on his catastrophic BBC interview. So he claimed he broke off just contract with Epstein's 2008 conviction and only saw him briefly in 2010 to cut ties. And the facts say otherwise. Flight logs and visitor logs show that Prince Andrew met or traveled with Epstein numerous times in the 90s and 2000s, including just a visit to Epstein's New York mansion in 2010. And the infamous time, though they were photographed walking just together in Central Park. And Andrew also just flew on Epstein's plane to the Virgin Islands in 2001. And it's all just coming out. And every time just one of these men said, no real relationship, a flight log or email pops up to say like, oh really? Like, what's about this gala in 2005, or this flight to his ranch in 2002, or this donation you accepted as though in 2013? Like, they are caught. Emails don't lie. People do, especially when a scandal is radioactive. And the lesson from flight logs with email dumps is simple. Like, the truth has a paper trail. And the powerful man in Epstein's circle left the fingertips all over the world, and in gas logs, on the pilot manifest, and in mail servers. And now those fingertips are betrayed, and like the lies, and they told to save themselves. Perhaps the most haunting contradiction is that some names show up in the private emails discussing donations or introductions, but never in public records. And that shows deliberation. Epstein and those folks knew to keep certain details of the obvious writer, and it suggests a consciousness of a guilt or at least awareness of a risk. And they knew like being seen with Epstein post-conviction was a bad news, so they moved underground like a private flights, a personal emails instead of a work emails, but the evidence remained, and now it's coming to light like piece by piece. And then soon, like the rich and powerful lied about Epstein times and the recipients like logs, emails are exposing them like one by one, and each contradiction not only unmasks an individual dishonesty but paints a bigger picture of a panicked elite class trying to rewrite a history. And as more documents emerge, that false narrative is crumbling, and one can't just help but feel if they lied about knowing him, what else are they lying about? And that's why these revelations are so important. They don't just catch a prince fibbing, so they hint at deeper cover ups or what happened behind Epstein's closed doors. And the pattern don't lie. People do. Again, like the pattern here is consistent. They all said barely knew him, and he documents like everything. Like all the documents shows that actually you knew him quite well. The credibility of many VIPs hesitators thanks to those black and white records, and frankly, those records might be the only justice some of the Epstein's victims ever just get, and the vindication of seeing the world realize that this man knew, like this man lied, and this man at best just enabled by silence. It's a very like broad, powerful circle, but who is still exposed? If we will zoom out from the individual lives and look at the power circle around Epstein, like um, just a constellation of high-profile associates, just who now find themselves under the microscope, like each has a unique exposure point and the vulnerability just revealed by Epstein's downfall. Like many powerful people suffered or got like from the clip, like for example, Bill Clinton with a frequency problem. Clinton isn't facing scrutiny because of one weak incident. It's the repetition that damns him, like flight after flight on the Lolita Express, multiple trips to Epstein's properties, and multiple coordinating emails and calls. And it's clear that Clinton had an ongoing relationship with Epstein, and he even invented Epstein to his VIP seats at 1995 fundraising dinner, and Epstein visited so the Clinton White House at least twice. And the records show that Epstein and Maxwell attending a 1993 political function there, and the Clinton defense is always like, I didn't witness any wrongdoing. And no victim has accused the Clinton of misconduct, but the pattern is indisputable. He was a regular Epstein's ward. And as I said, frequency tells the truth when words don't. And the Clinton's repeated associations is what keeps his name tied to Epstein in the public mind. And it's not one fortunate fault, it's dozens of interactions. And politically, so that's devastating because it suggests at the best poor judgment and at the worst complicity. And Clinton's frequency with Epstein versus his minimal public acknowledgement of it, like only admitting to 4 flights initially when logs show many more, adds a sheen of a cover-up by omission, and he is exposed as having lied by understatement, and it undermines his statesman elder image. And the frequency speaks volume. Like he chose to associate with Epstein again and again, even after Epstein was already suspected of abusing minors in the mid 2000s. And Clinton flew with Epstein in 2002, 2003, when allegations were percolating, and met in 2005. Like why? As the question stains his legacy and unanswered. Another one, who is now a president, like the silent presence problem, Donald Trump. Unlike Clinton, Trump doesn't appear in the logs of international jet-setting with Epstein. Like Trump's fingertips are in the earlier phase of Epstein's activities, and like 90s and the early 2000s, like in Palm Beach and in New York. And Trump issues the proximity plus mystery. Like he was clearly around. Epstein and Maxwell were frequent guests in the Mar-a-Lago, and Trump attended Epstein's dinner parties and just invited Epstein to his clubs, and just the one victim, Giffrey, was recruited just from Trump's property in Mar-a-Lago Spa, and another 14-year-old, just a Maria Farmer, first met Epstein at a party at Trump's Florida home in 1995. So Trump is woven throughout this Epstein story, and yet, crucially, no victim has accused Trump of sexual wrongdoing, and Epstein himself indicated that Trump never participated beyond knowing. And this leaves a cloud of speculation. But, like, did Trump truly not partake? And did he knew and say nothing? And Epstein email saying that Trump knew about the girl, suggesting Trump had awareness, and that alone, knowing that crimes are not just alerting authorities, is a terrible look. And politically, so it's a fodder for opponents and just a discomfort for allies. And a Trump's silent presence always there, like never publicly linked to a crime, is his vulnerability. And because people remember those old footage of a Trump partaking and just partying with Epstein in 1992, or his 2002 quote of Raising Epstein, so he likes a beautiful woman, on the younger slide is a sticks. And proximity without involvement is still a story, like a story people don't forget. And indeed, like in 2020 campaign and likely in 2024, like Trump's Epstein ties come up in an attack, and it's a stain he can't just fully wash off and just throw or not. And that's a permanent just hysterics. And like, why was he so close to Epstein? Like, did he really just kick him out just heroically, or was there more? And that's an answerable question in political liability and a vulnerable or of that kind of proximity. So like other peoples who were like also involved, who were like also like in that close circle are the Bill Gates, like the post-convention contract problem. Like again and again, like Gates stands out because he befriended Epstein after Epstein was a known sex offender. And the biggest issue isn't that Gates met Epstein in 18s. He didn't. It's the case chose to meet with Epstein repeatedly in 2011, 12, 13, and after Epstein's 2008 conviction. And this looks intentional or calculated. Like, why on earth was the world's richest man hanging out to his convicted pedophile? Like Gates claims it was a secure donations for a charity. Even if true, it shows astonishingly poor judgment or naivety. Like some suspect Epstein was leveraging those meetings to just to rehabilitate himself via Gates' credibility of course. So like that Epstein somehow had a personal leverage over Gates, and there are unconfirmed rumors that Epstein hinted at a knowing of an affair just to get had and a blackmail. So regardless, Gates is exposed as having just a courted just a paragraph, and in the mail, Epstein bragged that he was an advisor and Gates philanthropy, and the Gates Foundation denies this, but Epstein did set up at least one meeting with the Gates and Nobel scientists in 2013, and the psychology is simple, like meeting a sex offender after the conviction isn't networking, so it's a calculation, like exactly, and the Gates is now scrambling, so he said meeting Epstein was a huge mistake, but those 2011 and 13 contacts happened more than once, and it undercuts Gates' image as a benevolent geek and makes him look like another just a power player who thought he was above moral norms, who just for someone so concerned with the global health and the children's welfare, it's deeply ironic and damaging to have it dined with Epstein multiple times at Epstein's New York mansion. and the same mansion where underage girls were molested. And a gate exposure is a hypocrisy and a lapse in the moral radar, and it won't just send him to jail, but it tarnishes his legacy. And it raises this question, like, if a man as smart as Gates found something to gain from Epstein, even after his disgrace, what a powerful did Epstein wield over these people, like perhaps introductions to other masters, and that hidden Epstein's influence was significant. And the Prince Andrew, like the visible collapse problem, like Andrew is one of the member of the Epstein's inner circle who has truly just suffered public consequences. So like his downfall has been dramatic. The catastrophic 2019 BBC interview where he offered a bizarre defense saying in the court sweat and that he stayed with Epstein in 2010 to break up just because it was convenient, and that interview effectively just convicted him in a court of public opinion, and the Queen stripped Andrew of his royal duties and the patronages in 2020, and he lost his title, his Royal Highness, and he's been removed from the public eye, and he settled a civil lawsuit with Virginia Griffith for an estimated of about just 14 millions in 2020. And he is now largely just a pariah. And Andrew's exposure is just already realized. He is a cautionary tale of all those others. And he is a living proof of what happens when you just don't stay silent and instead do just disastrous interview when you became the face of elitist just entitlement and just lack of remorse as a phrase. Like Andrew showed what happened when denial breaks on the camera and the others to watch him just burn and learn and stay silent. And indeed, after just seeing Andrew's public self immolation, and guys like Bill Gates never talk about Epstein unless forced and is in certainty. So like not on the TV. So they know it can ruin them. And Andrew's visible collapse serves a perverse fiction and a function. Like it scared others into silence and semi-successful computational damage, but Andrew himself remains exposed in a way few others are. Like those whole world associates him with Epstein's abuse, like Gifford photos, and Andrews is iconic, and his reputation is irretrievable, like within the power circles. And Andrew is a fallen example, like stripped of power, titles, dignity, and interesting. So like he is also the only one to experience a modicum of accountability, and in that he faced a lawsuit and intense public shaming. And in just a word, he wouldn't be the only one, but here we are. Obviously, so there were like various CEOs and just financiaries like the quiet immunity problem, and this includes names like Jess Taylor, ex JP Morgan, and just the Barclays executives, and Leon Black, billionaire investor, and Glenn Dubin, just a hand fund manager, and Leslie Wexner, billionaire, just the L Brands founder, and many others. And these men haven't just been front page faces of a scandal like Andrew, but they are deeply entangled and just arguably just all their continued standing to quiet deal and silence. And for instance, Jess Taylor is currently fighting a civil suit, but hasn't faced criminal charges. And Leon Black, so it was revealed that paid Epstein 158 million for financial advice between 2012 and 13, and just astronomical suspicious sum, but stepped down from Apollo Global Management under pressure. But he too hadn't been legally just charged with anything Epstein related. And Glenn Dubin was named by Virginia Griffith, so as someone, so she was trafficking to which he denies, and Dubin was just were just very close to Epstein, like so much so that one of the Epstein's victims was being killed at Dubin's house under just Epstein's orders and just according to the court testimony. And yet the Dubins remain wealthy, philanthropist and not just a pariah. So like how? A quiet immunity like either via just non-protection deals and Epstein's 2008 deal immunized just anonymous conspirators and likely just covering some associates or just simply because their power just networks protected them. And these CEOs just appear to have largely just gotten away with it, like so far. And they didn't just do stupid interviews like Andrew. They issued brief denials via PR teams and then vanished from the conversations. And for them, like the key exposure risk isn't a public notoriety, but most people just don't know domain names. It's a financial and legal paper trails that might just yet surface. And indeed, just a slew of emails to Epstein and some related just with sexual content about a young woman, so could still just wreck him in a court. And the Lil Black is under investigation by the CSC, like simply for not disclosing or to his stakeholders how deeply he was involved with Stein, and not for the involvement himself. And in essence, so this powerful man enjoy a form of quiet immunity, and they are not being trotted out in a perp walks or lambasted daily on TV, and they quietly just step back from some roles, paid some settlements, and kept their freedom and much of their fortune. And their exposure is limited to niche financial like news and the footnotes of Epstein's story. And even so, like arguably so, they were as complicit as others. And that's powerful for you to ensure you're visible when accountability comes. And it truly just feels like ensuring you're invisible is often just the top priority, like of an older just elite when a scandal strikes, and those guys managed it, and they're exposed insofar as they are named in the documents and will be in the history books with the asterisks, but they aren't facing public scorn like Andrew, so they engineered a quiet sort of immunity, like we are influenced behind the closed doors. And now the pattern across a power circle, like the higher they were, the more effort to hide or downplay their Epstein ties. And Clinton repeated his scandal, emitting a claim like a mantra, and Trump and Gates claim ignorance or innocence, but won't dive into details. And Andrew Tide just try to deny and in the one like who blew up and the CEOs just lawyered up and faced from the view and all watch each others and then just adjusted and they saw Epstein die in jail suspiciously and I suspect that sent a chill like if he was silenced I better shut up too and they saw Andrew humiliated and said no interviews and no comment. And they saw and Ghislaine Maxwell go on a trial and not name names and likely just embracing relief and continuing to stay mom hoping and the storm passes. And what unites them now is a fear of further leaks, further document dumps, further testimonies that could name them and they are avoided so far the full blast of just a reckoning. But as we've seen, bit by bit, records are emerging and they are not out of the woods. And that's why many of them are still working behind the scenes to keep files sealed, to discredit victims, to lobby DOJ to limit releases, and the power circle is circling wagons to protect themselves. To understand the power circle, like follows the nations, not the planes, and Epstein leads friends invested together, like donated together, sat on the boards together, and they weren't just listened on the flight log. So because they didn't just need to hitch a ride, they had their own, and their exposure isn't on a manifest; it's in the money and favors exchange. And indeed, following those donations reveals a billionaire donated to Ghislaine Maxwell at Remar charity. Why? Perhaps to keep her happy and silent, or a politician received major contributions from one of the Epstein's bodies, maybe as insurance. And it's unseen. a web of just influence that persists. And in summary, so the power circle around Epstein is still largely protected and safe, like Prince Andrew's very public flame out, and they have vulnerabilities in the frequency of the contract, and like a Clinton, silent knowledge like a Trump, and post-conviction meetings like Gates, and documented complicity as Haley, Black, and Tubin, but so far they are experienced minimal consequences thanks to silence in the status, and they also what happened to Andrew and learns a key lesson: deny, minimize, and above all say nothing more. But justice may yet catch up. Like the House Oversight Committee is now thinking a Maxwell Seal deposition files and the DOJ interview transcripts with Epstein associates and more, and there are hints that some big names everyone expected may finally be revealed. So like see earlier section, and if it happens, this powerful circle may just finally be shattered. And for now, they remain a cautionary constellation, like a reminder that for the ultra-just elite, connections can be as damning as crimes, and the truth is often just the first um, casualty of panic, and each of them, in their own way, in a case study, in what someone will do just to avoid Epstein's shadow, like lie, forget, pay, hide, anything abstract come clean. And these revelations are far from others, and we will try to cover like another part, just another part of those some revelations in a part two of this monologue, and we will delve into even more explosive threats like Ghislaine Maxwell secrets from behind the parks, and the mysteriosity and just the missing evidence that fuels conspirators, and maybe the unresolved mysteries of Epstein's private island. Like subscribe and stay tuned for part two, and the story only gets more intense from here.